All right, Scott, thank you for that. And we're continuing our coverage of the Comey testimony. We're talking now with federal prosecutor Vikas Bajaj. He's here in studio.
All right, Vic, thanks for joining us here. Let's talk about what your main takeaway was from what we saw today. Obviously, a lot of eyes on what was happening on Capitol Hill, a lot of anticipation for this. What did you take away from Comey's testimony?
Absolutely. Great question. First off, I'd like to point out that I am a defense attorney, not a federal prosecutor. A lot of my federal prosecutor buddies might get upset if I take that title. You know, my biggest takeaway is that eventually this is going to come onto somebody's desk, whether it's Mueller or somebody else, and it's going to be a credibility contest. And in a very good way, a very clever way, I think Mr. Comey testified as to items that only he observed, or things that he believes he's the only one to observe. And that's why I think he took such pains in drafting this novel-like, suspense thriller-like memorandum or his statement in advance, which he leaked. Now, of course, that was done so as to create a picture and paint a picture of a secluded, sequestered meeting between the President of the United States and the former FBI Director. The reason why that's so important, and we can also see that that dovetails into President Trump's own counsel, who made a statement afterwards, the reason why it's so important is because it is now set up to be a credibility contest. And in these types of cases, especially federal investigations for obstruction of justice, whether it's a quid pro quo or it's sort of asking for a favor to keep a job or not cooperating with an investigation, the real issue here is credibility. Who do you believe? And I think the biggest takeaway for me, frankly, is the emotion and the scarred testimony that Mr. Comey delivered before the hearing. It was hard to separate his testimony from one who was disgruntled from being fired.
Well, if you could speak to that exactly. He stood there, he raised his hand, he said he was going to tell the entire truth, and then he led pretty much with President Trump is a liar, basically, contradicting him. I mean, the emotional part of that, how did that play?
Well, that's very interesting because we have to not forget that although former Director Comey is an FBI director, right? He was an FBI director, which means essentially a law enforcement arm, an investigatory arm. You know, he is so comfortable testifying in congressional hearings and with the world of politics in general. And it's very troubling when you have a truth teller, a person who is subpoenaed and summoned to tell the truth, and when that individual injects individual emotion into the conversation, things that cannot be proven, that's problematic from a defense attorney's point of view like myself. I think there's a lot of fodder there. There's a lot of emptiness, I believe, that was filled in, unfortunately, with Mr. Comey's personal opinions regarding Donald Trump.
Vic, when you talk about a guy like James Comey, who you could say has nothing to lose in all of this, he's already been fired, and at this point he's just telling his side of the story. Did he say anything that you think could potentially lead to impeachment, taking that next step, kind of the macro view of all of this?
Well, I think there are going to be, and there are already, motions and movements towards impeachment. Did he say anything over and above what he offered yesterday in the leaked report and his statement to the congressional hearing? Not really. And we could expect that there would be nothing new that was presented today for one specific reason. When there are police reports drafted, investigation reports drafted, DEA 6 reports drafted from any federal agent, there is always a recordation. And we know, as defense attorneys, to always ask these percipient witnesses, and that's what Mr. Comey is presenting himself as here, a factual percipient witness. We always ask the question, well, you're trained to take note of all the important things, aren't you? Well, yes, sir. And you record those, don't you? Yes, sir. And you recorded those important things in your report, or in this case, your statement that was put out a day before. Yes. So if there are important revelations that Mr. Comey was to have revealed today, from a defense attorney's point of view, that would just be extremely unnerving. So there really were no surprises. I don't think he said anything that would have been, let's say, more fuel to the fire. The only additional issue here is this was testimony under oath, under penalty of perjury. Again, in the federal system and in the state system here in California, if you have two reasonable interpretations of the truth, That would be President Trump's statement and version of what happened if it goes that far, and former Director Comey's version of what happened if it goes that far. You have to adopt the one that goes towards innocence.
Before we let you go, was it appropriate or normal for President Trump to have a New York lawyer, a personal lawyer, not a White House lawyer, address this afterwards?
I would say so, yes, because at the end of the day, President Trump is recently the President of the United States of America. This is an individual that does not have a significant amount of actual practical political experience. So I'm not surprised in the least that he would have his personal attorney there to make sure that person who knows the foundation of Trump's organization, his campaign, and the person will look out for his best interest. I don't see anything odd there, and frankly, Donald Trump is not your typical politician. So there are a lot of things here that are out of the norm. Criminal? Probably not, but definitely abnormal.
Yes, so the investigation now does continue, and again, the president had nothing to say when he was asked directly about it today as well. Vikas Bajaj, we appreciate your insight. Certainly helps us further what's going on today. So, Vic, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, a murder